Beneath Rome there are burial chambers that, according to the official church record, complicate the official record in ways most people have never been told about. The communities buried inside them were erased from history. Their art was different. Their theology was different. And for 30 years, researchers including Robin Jensen at Notre Dame have been quietly documenting what they found, and what it means for everything most people think they know about early Christianity. Here's what they found. And here's why the official story of Christianity's first centuries is more complicated than anyone officially admits. Because the catacombs don't tell the story the church has been telling. They tell a different one. And the difference matters more than most people realize. Rome. The eternal city. A place where you literally cannot dig a foundation without hitting something ancient. Where a subway construction project can get shut down for a decade because workers hit a Roman bath nobody knew existed. This city is layered, history stacked on top of history, secret on top of secret. And underneath all of it, a world most people will never see. The catacombs stretch beneath the city like a second Rome, darker, quieter, and in many ways, more honest. These weren't built to impress anyone. They were built by people who had no choice. Early Christians in the 1st and 2nd century couldn't bury their dead in Roman cemeteries. They were outsiders. Persecuted minorities. So they went underground, literally. They carved tunnels by hand into the soft volcanic rock called tufa, layer by layer, sometimes 4 or 5 levels deep. They buried their dead in the walls. They painted their beliefs on the ceilings. They left behind a record of who they actually were, not who later centuries would say they were. But here is the part that nobody in the official tour will ever show you. Because what these people painted on the walls before they died, it was not supposed to survive. And the reason it almost didn't have anything to do with time. It has to do with who found it first. So who were they? And what happened to the record they left behind? The catacombs were rediscovered in the 16th century, not by historians, not by archaeologists, not by anyone with a notebook and a research grant. They were found by treasure hunters. Grave robbers. People who crawled into the tunnels looking for gold, jewelry, anything valuable enough to sell. And when the church realized what was down there, what was painted on those walls, access got locked down fast. Not dramatically. Not with an announcement. Just quietly, systematically, over decades, until the only people allowed inside were the ones the Vatican approved. The question nobody in the official record ever fully answered is, what specifically did they see on those walls that made open access impossible? Because the answer is still down there. And it is not what most people would expect. That matters because of what gets decided in that approval process. What gets studied? What gets published? What gets left in the dark? Robin Jensen, a theologian and art historian at Notre Dame, has spent years documenting early Christian iconography, the actual images painted by actual communities in the first 3 centuries. And what she found in the catacomb art doesn't line up cleanly with the version of early Christianity most people learned in school or in church. The imagery is more diverse than the official account suggests. Some symbols connect to traditions the church would later declare heretical. Some burial chambers show communities mixing Jewish ritual practice with Christian belief in ways that were supposed to have disappeared by the 2nd century. Supposed to have disappeared. But I didn't. Because the walls don't lie. The people who painted them were not writing theology for a council to approve. They were burying their dead. They were scared. They were grieving. And in that grief, they painted exactly what they believed, not what they were supposed to believe. These people had no cathedrals. No protection. No power. All they had was each other and whatever they could carve into the rock before someone found them. And in those desperate, handmade images scratched into volcanic stone 2,000 years ago, they left behind a version of their faith that no council ever voted on. No bishop ever edited. No institution ever sanitized. That version survived. Quietly. In the dark. Not because it was destroyed. Because for 1,700 years nobody with a camera and an audience was paying attention. If you're watching this story, hit the like button so YouTube understands you want the next chapter unlocked. And tell me in the comments, which beautiful country are you watching from? And what's the exact time there right now? So what exactly is on those walls that the official story skips over? The first thing you notice when you study catacomb art seriously is how Jewish it is. And that sounds obvious until you realize what it actually means. The early church, by the 3rd and 4th century, was working very hard to separate itself from Judaism. Theologically, culturally, politically. The official narrative needed Christianity to be its own thing, distinct, independent, divinely unique. But the catacomb paintings from the 1st and 2nd century tell a different story. Menorahs next to crosses. Jewish burial prayers carved into the same walls as Christian ones. The same underground city used by both communities, sharing architectural traditions, artistic motifs, and in some documented cases, the same corridors. Not separate. Not divided. Together. And that matters enormously because the official account of early Christianity depends on a clean break. A clear moment where the new faith stepped away from its Jewish roots and became something entirely its own. But the catacombs suggest that the break was not clean. It was not fast. And for some communities, was never complete. There is a section beneath the Villa Torlonia in Rome, a catacomb used by Rome's Jewish community for centuries, where the boundary between Jewish and Christian burial practice becomes almost impossible to trace. Scholars have debated for decades which graves belong to which community. The symbols overlap. The prayers overlap. The grief overlaps. Because 40 feet below ground these were not two separate religions keeping careful distance from each other. They were neighbors. They were family members. They were people who had lost someone and needed somewhere to put them. That human reality is exactly what institutional history tends to flatten. Because institutions need clean lines. Clean origins. Clean separations. And the people buried beneath Rome's streets, the ones who carved their beliefs into tufa by lamplight 2,000 years ago, did not live inside clean lines. They lived inside the complicated, frightening, beautiful truth of what it meant to believe something the world above ground was trying to kill. And one specific community buried down there, a group so theologically distinct that their very existence was later written out of the record entirely, is the one piece of evidence that makes the official story impossible to defend. The Marcionites. That is not an accident. In the 2nd century, a man named Marcion of Sinope built one of the largest Christian networks in the Roman world. Larger, by some historical estimates, than the Proto-Orthodox Church that would eventually become Roman Catholicism. He had congregations across the empire. He had his own version of Scripture. He had communities that met, worshipped, buried their dead, and carved their beliefs into the walls of Roman catacombs with the same desperate faith as every other persecuted minority beneath that city. And then the Orthodox Church won. And the Marcionites were declared heretics. And their texts were burned. Their communities were absorbed or erased. And the version of early Christianity that survived, the one that got to write the history, described them as a fringe movement. A deviation. A wrong turn. But the historical record says something different. The Marcionites were not a fringe group. Not a deviation. A competitor. Their texts were destroyed so thoroughly that we know them only through the hostile writings of their opponents, men like Tertullian who spent entire books refuting ideas he was simultaneously ensuring nobody else could read. And the movement lost. Not because it was wrong. Because the other side had better political connections when Constantine made his decision in 313 AD. That is the thing about history that the catacombs keep forcing you to confront. It is not written by the most faithful. It is not written by the most accurate. It is written by whoever survives long enough to hold the pen. And beneath Rome, in the dark, in the tufa, in the overlapping grief of communities that were neighbors and rivals and sometimes the same people, the ones who never got to hold the pen left their version anyway. Scratched into rock. Sealed behind locked doors. Waiting. They are still down there. All of it. The Jewish-Christian hybrid chambers. The Marcionite communities whose texts were burned but whose story is still down there. The symbols that don't fit any officially approved category. 60 locations. 100 miles of tunnels. And most of it, still unexcavated. Still unsealed. Still waiting for someone to look carefully enough. Which brings us to a question that goes far beyond Rome. If one empire could bury an entire version of its own religious history underground, what happened in places where there was no underground to hide in? Where communities had nowhere to go and no rock to carve? If this hits differently, like it. Not for us. Because it tells the algorithm that stories like this one deserve to be seen. One tap. That's all it takes. Subscribe if you want to keep going to places the official story doesn't talk about. We do this every week. And we are just getting started. Drop a comment below, did you know the Marcionites existed before this video? One word answer. Yes or no. We genuinely want to know. And if the catacombs showed you how history gets buried, this next video will show you how a people refuse to let that happen. A community that practiced Judaism for 2,500 years deep in the heart of Africa. No catacombs. No tunnels. No stone walls to hide behind. Just memory, passed from one generation to the next without a single break for 25 centuries. Long before the modern state of Israel existed. Long before the world knew they were there. That video is right here. Watch it next. You are not going to want to stop halfway through.